Tony Stark is the bad boy of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Arrogant, fast-talking, lots of hair gel. The kind of guy who plows ahead with his plans, no matter what anyone thinks. But he's got as many problems as he has gadgets. He's scarred by the death of his parents and the near invasion of Earth by a massive horde of aliens. He's betrayed by his friends at every turn, and he constantly has to fight for everything he has over and over again. The Avengers' genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist has more skeletons in his closet than he does special suits. And the films aren't shy about showing them to the world, and using them as motivation for his personal growth and creating drama amongst those around him. This also makes him a fascinating case study. Welcome to my office. I'm the Cine-Analyst, looking at what makes fictional characters tick. Today's case file: how to control circumstances and alienate others with robots. Subject: Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. The films: Iron Man's 1, 2, and 3, The Avengers Age of Ultron, and Captain America: Civil War. Welcome to the Cine-Analyst, a show about the problems of fictional people and the worlds they live in, an exercise in pop cultural analysis asking why we like to torment characters so. And boy, do we have an excellent figure to study in the pursuit of that question today. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe does a real disservice to Tony Stark, in that they always make him the one whose decisions lead to disastrous consequences, and who is almost always at fault for the bad things that happen. Seriously, rewatch the films and see for yourself how Tony is basically the reason why everything goes wrong, with the exception of the alien invasion in the Avengers. But to treat the most clearly psychologically damaged character as the one who won't stop making things worse also allows them to have a clear leader in Captain America, and to create a kind of narrative arc that, hopefully for the character, will end in a feeling of redemption. Or, death. But we'll get to that. When we first meet Tony Stark in Iron Man, he is an arms dealer who basically spreads death and destruction while making a profit on it. In one of the earliest scenes, we see him literally sitting inside an armored car with a drink in hand, looking like he's going to a Hollywood premiere rather than to an arms demo in the middle of hostile territory. He is then captured in an attempt by his business partner Obadiah to kill him and take over the company. Before that revelation, Tony Stark believes that he's being punished for all of the terrible things he's done by terrorists. He is saved by Yinsen, a captured scientist who puts an electromagnet in Tony's chest to keep the shrapnel from making its way into his heart and killing him. It doesn't end too well for Yinsen though. He ends up dying. Upon his return, Stark decides to shut down his weapons company and focus on building an Iron Man suit in order to help others, trying to undo some of the damage he's created by turning a profit. Ever since, this is what Tony keeps trying to do: help people. But at every turn, people just get hurt and die, which makes Tony feel in part responsible for them. When you watch the movies, right off the bat you notice that Tony Stark is the funniest member of the team, and one of the funniest characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's easy to see how that humor is a deflecting tool, meant to be endearing to others while keeping them at a safe and easy emotional distance while he judges and analyzes them. It even does some of the work disarming them, so that he can get a closer look inside of their personalities, depending on how they react to him. The only film we see that coping mechanism come down is in Iron Man 3, when he is in such a vulnerable mental state that he doesn't have the mental energy to keep up the facade. I don't want to talk about the addiction part because it really was only covered in the second film, and then he recovers immediately after, plus nobody really likes the second film, so I'd rather not talk about it at length. So when does Tony's ego split? Where does his self-preservation finally meet the desire to do good? Well, that's kind of a difficult thing to say. For Tony, there is no Iron Man that exists in a separate mental space as Tony Stark. They're actually one and the same person. That doesn't mean that there's no ego split, it just doesn't manifest as two separately aligned egos, an ego and an alter ego, like with other superheroes. The obvious answer is in the first movie, when Tony goes after the airman when his chute doesn't deploy after firing at Iron Man. This is his very first heroic act in the suit. But Tony is perhaps too arrogant to think that there is any real sense of danger. After all, the suit is all about creating control. It could be at the end of the first film, when he tells his secretary, later girlfriend, Pepper, to override the arc reactor in order to take down Obadiah, who has posed a very limited threat in an Iron Man suit of his own. But yeah, that doesn't quite seem to fit either. He calls himself a superhero at the end of the first film to a crowd of reporters, but it's sort of clear that Tony Stark doesn't really understand what that term means. To me, the moment of clearest ego split is the moment that causes him the most psychological harm and echoes throughout the following films. It is the moment at the end of The Avengers, when he throws the bomb into the opening and sees the massive alien army waiting to destroy all of Earth. The moment that alters his entire mentality and conception of the world. His suit couldn't save him. It couldn't connect him to Pepper. It was all him, by himself, making one decision and then having a total loss of control. He lives, sure, but basically out of pure luck. He is forced to face his own mortality and choose to actively go forward, even knowing that he could very well die. The smartest thing that Iron Man 3 did was show how the attack in New York so affected Tony, giving him PTSD in the process. It is interesting they chose to make his the most apparent case of PTSD, considering that even though the MCU doesn't show it, the other human characters would have been totally reeling from the implications and events from the New York City attack. He has frequent nightmares, he tries to make himself invincible and protect himself from the awesome threat that he knows is lurking somewhere out in space, but he doesn't sleep. He's become obsessed with safety, he has flashbacks, panic attacks, self-destructive behavior, avoiding the subject of New York altogether, striving constantly for a sense of control in a world that has totally changed for him. He works to get through the anxiety and the feeling of helplessness as best he can, but even he knows it's not enough. The story revolves around soldiers coming back from war and dealing with terrible injuries, both physical and mental ones. It handles the topic beautifully. At least at first. See, the problem with Iron Man 3 is that it sort of glosses over that Tony hasn't really gotten help for his PTSD. Sure, he destroys the suits, which by the way doesn't matter because he already has a whole new legion of them for Ultron. He also gets the arc reactor removed from his chest, and he throws it out into the ocean, proclaiming that he is a changed man. Hell, they even make the whole movie a joke by having him tell it to the sleeping Bruce Banner, and we're supposed to assume that everything is fine now, even though nothing really gets resolved. Becoming self-aware that the suit was a protective case does not, in fact, change anything, since one movie later he's right back in the suit and using them to fight off bad guys as well as protect others with the same attitude he had before. You could call that bad writing, but I call that mishandling a sensitive topic. We see in Age of Ultron, Tony still fears the aliens as well as continues to feel responsible for the death of his teammates because of his inability to, quote, do more, either because of a weakness, a lack of preparedness, or perhaps selfishness as seen in Scarlet Witch's nightmare vision. In the vision, Tony sees all of the Avengers dead at the hands of the Chitauri, the aliens from the first Avengers movie. When he approaches them, a dying Captain America says, "You could have saved us." That's a really powerful moment for Tony. Even after the creation of the Ultron robot, he still believes in the mission and goes ahead and creates the Vision, assuming that even though he made a mistake the first time, this is how he is going to save everyone. He has conviction, but he hasn't learned to leave his worries behind. Again, he's letting his fear rule him, but in this case, it isn't as self-destructive. In the end, he even formally quits the Avengers, only to be dragged back in over his guilt over what happened in Sokovia in the film Civil War. It is the burden of responsibility that weighs him down, and the fear of losing everything that keeps him from ending the cycle of trying to absolve himself and consistently failing to do so. In a way, Tony has the same problem as the original Captain Kirk does in Star Trek, in that he's always looking for a way out, always looking for a way to win, and in most cases he can. However, unlike Captain Kirk, his multiple flirtations with eternal demise and darkness have left him a lot more weary and shaken up. Perhaps it's guilt for surviving when others have not, coming to terms with the fact that all his snark and pomp can't protect him from being killed. or the fact that his parents' death left him with a complex about morality and being abandoned. Honestly, it's probably all three of those, given all that he's gone through in these movies. Tony overcorrects his behavior, which is essentially his problem. He wants to do good, to right the wrongs he's committed, but does so in ways that push the limits of good intentions. Worried about not being able to save enough people, he builds an army of robots and creates artificial intelligence found inside the gem of Loki's staff in order to power it, in spite of everybody's contradictions. He is so desperate to prove himself that he literally ends up destroying a city full of people and endangering the world. Cap accuses Tony of not being the type to sacrifice himself for others, telling him to stop pretending to be a hero. And I think that's something that really bothered Tony, because it is who he was prior to his Iron Man creation. It's part of why he felt he needed to throw the bomb through the portal, even though he might get stuck and die floating in space. The rhetoric around Tony pre-Iron Man is interesting. When at an industry event awards, we see a Rolling Stone cover proclaiming, "Tony Stark wants to save the world." And he truly believed that before being shown the error of his ways, by getting to know the people who he is hurting and helping with his technology. The other way Tony causes trouble in these movies is in his past actions coming back to haunt him, like in Iron Man 3 when Aldrich Killian goes to try and destroy Tony after he snubbed him at a New Year's party as a cruel and humiliating joke years before, or when the Maximoff twins make it their life's mission to destroy him and the Avengers because one of his bombs were used to kill his parents. Not that we're going to talk about Iron Man 2, again, because it is a terrible movie, I cannot stress that enough. But the villain Justin Hammer goes after Tony Stark because he bests him at every turn. It's not just Tony's brilliance that puts him and his loved ones in constant danger, but also his arrogance. His attitude is what angers people the most, even turning the even-keeled Captain America against him. Unlike Captain America, whose sins are mostly forgotten because nearly everyone he knew is dead, Tony has to constantly deal with the consequences of his former actions, and those he commits while trying to get his bearing. Even when Tony quits the Avengers, he gets dragged into the conflict once again because of the guilt of Ultron and the fate of Sokovia. He can never let what he's done just stay as it is. It's like he must try and atone for every single bad thing he's ever done. I think that's why he ends up being so protective over Peter Parker. Not just because he reminds Tony of himself, you know, super smart, red color scheme, dead parents, but because he also realizes that he has to place Parker in more danger in order to get what he wants. And the fact that he even thinks about doing that deeply unsettles him. After all, there's no reason why he has to go to Parker for help in Captain America Civil War, but he knows if he wants to choose the best of the best, he has to go to Parker, even if it means putting a teenaged boy, little more than a child at this point, in danger. That hits home most when Rhodey almost dies at the end of the film, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops in Spider-Man Homecoming. But Tony does good too. He creates the Vision by putting Jarvis into an Infinity Stone animated body. His robots do help with crowd control. He saves the world by throwing the atomic bomb into the portal and ending the alien threat in New York before it can go any further. He uses his legion of robots to save the president, and he even gives Rhodes the ability to walk again after his accident in Civil War. That's more than most people do, even in a fictional lifetime. And yet somehow it's just not enough for him. It doesn't let him feel as though he's done enough to atone for all the hurt he's done in the world, and so he just keeps going. Perhaps he's hoping to somehow match the legacy of his father, with Captain America acting as a reminder of that long-lasting legacy of good as opposed to his terrible one of death and destruction. The Stark Relief Foundation, the peacekeeping robots, none of that seems to make even a dent in his reputation to him, so long as still people prey upon his guilt. You have to wonder if Alfred Nobel felt the same. In some ways, Tony lives in the shadow of his father, and even pays for his sins. Ivan Vanko of Iron Man 2 comes to destroy him because of what Howard Stark did to his father. He's constantly compared to his father in the media, as we see at the beginning of Iron Man. Obadiah even claims that he is selfish compared to his father, who in the MCU helped build the atomic bomb. As though Tony betrays his father's legacy by not wanting to provide the world with weaponry. At the same time, it's clear he loved his father, and wanted to feel worthy of his attention and love, which pushed him to go into tech in the first place. For Tony, Howard Stark is at the center of much of his identity. In the first Iron Man, when discussing his father with Obadiah, he comments,
"I never got to say goodbye to my father. There's questions that I would ask him. I would ask him how he felt about what this company did. If he was conflicted, if he ever had doubts. Or maybe he was every inch the man we all remember from the newsreels."
The loss of his father pushed him to shut himself off from the world, and to become paranoid about losing even more people. Pepper, his girlfriend for most of the films, also becomes a source of grief and loss, in part because he pushes her away in order to protect her, and the fact that she leaves him in Civil War, presumably because being in a relationship with Tony is just too stressful to handle. While Pepper has no responsibility to stick around for the benefit of Tony's health, it definitely touches on those abandonment issues that come to a head after his parents both died. All Tony sees, really, is people leaving him. He tries to use everything to his advantage because he's afraid. Ultron says that Tony Stark is a sickness, attempting to create peace through silence and lack of opposition. But is he really? Or is he just a man trying to do his very best? Let's take a closer look at what he goes through. Tony's life and well-being are constantly in danger. Whether he's being kidnapped by terrorist groups desperate for Stark weaponry, to being held captive by insane exploding science experiments, to fighting off huge, deadly aliens. Tony doesn't have the strength, or agility, or healing powers that his other comrades do. Like Batman's suit, the Iron Man suit is as much a source of mental comfort as it is anything else. The only way he can keep himself and those around him safe. In fact, he doesn't even build the suit to help people per se, he more builds it for aiding his own desires and curiosities, and only after time has passed, he adapts the suit for additional uses. The suit still, however, remains as much a protective vehicle as a vehicle for Tony's control. During his presentation at Harvard in Civil War, Tony jokes about how the special glasses that he uses to recreate a scene with his parents are really just an expensive form of therapy. But you know what? He's actually right. Like we've discussed with Freud's process of remembering, repeating, and working through, Tony Stark is repeating, changing the way the conversation in the scene goes in a way to empower him and give him the kind of closure that he would need. Knowing that it's a simulation meant to create an illusion of closure defeats the purpose of the exercise, but hell, it's a start. You might even call it another coping mechanism, like the suit, where it helps more to explore his limitations, and that he will eventually need to let it go, if he can at all. Noting this attachment to the past, and that he never got closure for their passing, Tony's immediate reversion to a more immature state when he finds out that Captain America's friend Bucky Barnes actually murdered his parents makes sense given how he has yet to move past the event in all of this time, considering how close he was to his mother, and how badly he wanted to feel close to his father. Bucky is not in any way part of the equation here, outside of his role as the present person who can take the physical punishment and help Tony regain control. After all, Tony, on an intellectual level, understands that Bucky could not control what he did, something which Tony has witnessed happen firsthand, and yet the release of all his grief and his ability to, in his mind, save his parents by doing what he could not do before is more important than not letting the villain of Civil War win. But this moment fades as soon as he realizes what he's done, and realizes that, yet again, he's made the situation worse with his somewhat selfish desires. I think the biggest problem with Iron Man is that he's just one guy, attempting to solve complex international problems with force and individual decision because he understands the horrors of the world and he's afraid of it. And that all feeds into his need for control. At one point, he relates the quote,
A famous man once said, "We create our own demons."
A quote that fits the character so well, he might as well put it on his business cards. Tony continues to get in his own way because he wants to atone and be a better person. But he doesn't know how to ask for and receive help from others, because he's so neurotic. He creates a sort of continuously perpetuated cycle of trying to change things without trusting others to help him, because in part of what Obadiah did to him back in the first film. And so he manages to overlook key components that only make the situation worse, and results in pushing people away. He does his best to phase out of any and all involvement with anyone, proving that his intentions are good, but his fear and his anxiety get in the way of making clear decisions. If there was any way for Tony to come out of this alive, and I'm not entirely sure that's actually Marvel's plan, then he would have to be willing to give himself up to what's happening, to accept help on an emotional level, and open himself up to criticism and being reined in by others. Basically, Tony needs to start giving up some control. Because even despite of all of his screw-ups, Tony Stark deserves a happy ending. He deserves, and in many ways has earned, redemption. But more than anything else, Tony Stark deserves peace. Next week, we'll take a look at a character who seems fine, even though they should be one of the most messed up heroes of the MCU, and yet somehow is not. But until then, I'm the Cine-Analyst, and I'll see you at our next session. This episode of the Cine-Analyst was written and recorded by me, Sarah Roncero Menendez. You can find the Cine-Analyst on Twitter and on Facebook at The Cine-Analyst, all one word, or you can find us on Tumblr at thecineanalyst.tumblr.com. This episode was mixed and edited by the awesome Angela Yee. Original music by the amazing Hua Pham. You can find more of his excellent work on soundcloud.com/euphemy. That's EUPHOME. Our logo was designed by the wonderful Priyanka Bose. Find more of her spectacular work at priyankabose.net. The Cine-Analyst is part of the Outerhaven Productions family of podcasts. For news on gaming, tech, entertainment, and anything else a well-informed nerd could want, check out theouterhaven.net.